Today is the July 24th, 2019 meeting of SIG Auth. It looks like we have a light agenda today. The first item was added by Mo, requesting feedback on what folks would like to see covered in KubeCon North America SIG Auth deep dive. Maybe you might want to go over how the KubeCon EU deep dive went, discuss that a little bit, and then feel out some options for North America.
Sure. So if we look back at sort of the history, like the first time I went to KubeCon was North America 2018. That time, you, Jordan, and Tim did a deep dive that was primarily focused around some interesting problems the SIG was trying to explore solutions for. That was, are you worried there's something on the board?
No. Interview questions.
Oh, that's good. Oh, good. Google job. So that was an interesting kind of exploration kind of deep dive, because it was basically that, you know, here's a set of problems that we had answers for, but not necessarily good answers. Right? We were trying to feel out if other people had options that would help them through those problems that we were kind of looking through. So that was one approach we took. The next deep dive we did was in Barcelona for the last KubeCon. That was Matt Rogers and myself, and that was primarily based on some feedback we've gotten in North America's intro, where a person who wanted to try to contribute had asked for like a code walkthrough. And I'd wanted to do that for a while anyway. So Matt and I had sort of put together some slides on that. I think overall it went well. There was, I think sort of the biggest hindrance was that there's actually a relatively limited amount of time to do like a code level walkthrough if you want to do like a lot of content. And we happen to have enough code that if you want to get deep into it, it'll take a decent amount of time. But I think it went well, and it is recorded, so if someone new joins the SIG, you at least have something to point them to. It might not be the best starting point, but it is a starting point. I haven't gotten any responses back on the mailing list. So at this point, for like future deep dives, the closest idea I have, and this is just sort of a guess, is we have a bunch of sub-projects, and perhaps like a deep dive for every sub-project, like over a period of many KubeCons, might be helpful. That way, future contributors have something to kind of look at, even if it's dated, they'll at least give them some history. But that's just a guess. It's not really based on anyone saying any particular desire or needs they have.
Yeah, I think I like that. There's also a contributor summit that we can contribute some topic to as well.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, the contributor summit I attended in Barcelona would have been a really great place to have sort of like a hour-long deep dive discussion about the code around auth. So I know, like I tried to get to as many of the deep dive sessions as I could, but there's a lot of overlapping concerns, and it's like trying to be at 5 different sessions at the same time. It's kind of hard. So yeah, at the contributor summit would be great to have something.
Were there any deep dive sessions that stood out as particularly good?
Tim St. Clair did a pretty good job in the cluster API of sort of walking through a number of the pieces there. It was fairly small and had some focused questions on that.
Was that mostly like a kind of architecture or code walkthrough?
Yes. So general overview, like these are the different sub-projects or components within cluster lifecycle, and sort of where the code lives and things like that. I'm trying to think. Jason DeTiberis and Daniel Smith were also in one, but I can't remember exactly which deep dive it was. But yeah, there were a few slides that were gone through from Daniel, and that was kind of helpful. I honestly, I was just getting started with contributing and going through the source code, so a lot of the sessions were just kind of like information overload, fire hose of information, trying to follow. But yeah, I mean, but Daniel Smith's slides on the controllers were particularly helpful. He had a session on that, and then he went over some of the slides in the deep dive. I think it was in the cluster lifecycle one as well, but I'm not entirely sure.
That was on the API extensions. I think he walked over all possible ways to extend Kubernetes in 50 short minutes or something.
Yeah, like for people that don't have time or something like
that. Talked at double speed.
Yeah.
So the second one sounded more end user focused than potentially a walkthrough on authenticator code. We discussed last meeting gatekeeper a little bit, or policy mechanism extensions. That would sort of be along the lines of Daniel's talk. Does that sound like a reasonable thing to cover as an option? I'll take notes of all the ideas that we have.
Yeah, I'd certainly appreciate a sort of walkthrough of OPA/gatekeeper. In particular, you know, how those projects might be an option going forward for sort of like the refactoring of pod security policies that was discussed at last SIG Auth meeting.
Hey, Tim, do you know if like the policy working group did a deep dive, or like what the policy group did a deep dive on in KubeCon? I'm kind of curious. Like, I don't necessarily want to step on like if they want to do like OPA or something, because it's like, oh, it's policy.
Yeah, I haven't checked in with them recently. I don't know if anyone on this call is involved with the policy working group. But they have done deep dives in the past. I don't know if they're planning on anything for this one. They've mostly kind of talked about sort of a generic policy architecture that they're working on. Yeah.
The PSP conversation might be interesting to talk about at the Contributor Summit as well.
Yeah, we actually talked about that at last year's deep dive. It was one of the topics that we called out. So yeah, it might be interesting to kind of like revisit those things and point out that, hey, we haven't actually solved any of them.
I was going to ask, so I got the email for like, hey, register for like your SIG deep dive or intro stuff. Do we get a separate email for doing Contributor Summit? Or?
Yeah.
Like, I know you sign up separately for Contributor Summit, but do you also tell them, hey, I want to do a session?
Yeah, I think Paris sends out an email.
Okay.
Any other ideas on a deep dive and not something for the Contributor Summit?
I really want someone from the community to say, hey, I want this, because then I know like it'll give them value. Like I don't need to like write slides on the code that I read all the time. Even though it is helpful to have it around.
Yeah, So as far as extensions that we own, you walked through the authenticator code. We could discuss Kube control client authentication plugins, like the exec plugin, and how to use that to, and the token review webhook to bridge authentication of Kubernetes with like AD or something. Other extension points, certificates API. You could do the equivalent that you did last time for authorization, which would be nice parity.
How to write your own approver.
Yeah, how to write your own approver. That could be interesting.
When we went over authentication and authorization, I purposely left off RBAC and like the rule resolver APIs, mostly because like the webhook can't do those, and I just couldn't make it fit in the time. I don't think that necessarily is a topic on its own that's enough, but it's something that's missing.
OPA, gatekeeper, authentication, RBAC, maybe not a topic alone, certificates API. Any other options?
I think some of the audit webhook stuff has landed since the last, since last December.
Audit webhook. Anything else that would be part of that discussion, like how to process audit logs?
Well, the new audit policy API, if that gets in, we could at least give a status update on it. Yeah, status updates in general. I don't know if that belongs more in the deep dive or the intro.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That seems like a reasonable list. We can decide offline what to propose if nobody else has suggestions. Maybe Mo could send out another email. Did you ever get responses on the first one? No.
Nope, I got exactly 0.
Did you have any suggestions?
The only suggestions I think I'd put in there, because at the time I was thinking about doing, I guess we can add this to the list, a deep dive on the node authorizer and the node admission plugins, since if you combine all of them together, those are kind of how we have a best practice path right now for nodes. And you don't necessarily need all of it at once, but it is sort of, if you check all those boxes, you get pretty decent security.
Okay. Let's clean these up, and maybe with more options, people will vote instead of feel pressured to contribute their own recommendations, and maybe we'll get a better response.
Yeah, how about we do this? We'll clean them up, and then as a follow-up to my email, I'll send an email with a poll in it.
That sounds good.
I think people might fill out a poll, maybe, if they don't want to +1, yeah, I want this.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to the next topic. Audit policy use cases and requirements.
So we had an API review of the audit policy, and essentially had the folks working on that go and collect more use cases. and kind of make sure we really understand the use cases for the audit policy API before we design an API for it. They have a document they're working on, but it looks like that never got sent out to the mailing list. And also none of them are on the call right now. So I'm going to propose that we punt this to the next meeting, and I'll try and get that document out to the mailing list in the meantime. And if folks have thoughts about audit policy, then keep an eye out for that.
Okay, doc, going to mailing list. And I'll just put that up for Peach.
Thanks.
Sure. All right. Does anybody have any other topics? Let's move on to these bugs then.
I'm double booked right now, so I'm going to duck out for the triage portion.
Cool.
Thanks.
QPS and burst to delegation authorization options as flags. Feature backlog. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah.
Looks like Jordan responded to this a little bit. It's unclear how. Okay, they have an aggregated API server that they're running. They
want to crank it up so that it can even have even more QPS and more burst.
They want to crank it down. The values are too low to trigger throttling. But then they have a link for throttling, or they have a line of log line of it getting throttled.
Did they mean to say they're too high?
Maybe.
Those are pretty big numbers. 200 QPS with 400 burst. I mean, that's a lot of requests.
I mean, I don't know. I've seen like a medium loaded E2E server hit like with an aggregated API hit like 40 subject access repeats a second.
But that's 200.
Right, but that was a not very highly loaded aggregated API server.
I thought that you said that was up or down. Okay. Wait, on that? Shouldn't it like not just like direct the...
Wouldn't it be? I mean, we have the cache, but it'd be unique auth clients per second, effectively, and then whatever the cache fall off is. So if you're using like a service account, if you had 1,000 service accounts hitting you once a minute, you'd be, at whatever 20.
Yeah, this seems like a potentially a general problem to solve in a way that won't require manual fudging of the client config bits, but in the meantime, there's no way that they can modify these numbers because they're hard coded. This might be just an internal library change. I guess it depends on what aggregated API servers they are using. I don't know.
Like, I don't think I want to expose this as CLI flags on anybody.
Yeah, because there's so many clients. No reason to expose one and not the other often. I'll do needs investigation to figure out if this is like library change or that's not a priority. I'll respond to this and either say that we would review a PR or that this is already possible after looking at the code, but I won't do that here. Sound good?
Yep.
Data race. Data race and client go.
Interesting. Updating and transport. And client plugin.
All right. Important soon. What are they doing? Interesting.
I think they're just making 2 calls to the same client, right, at the same time.
They're constructing 2 clients at approximately.
Oh yeah, it's 2 distinct clients, but they must share that transport.
Yeah, it probably hits the transport cache.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, this is kind of an interesting one. I'll do backlog.
Do we want to talk about the API implications or the API question of this, of what does star actually mean in authorization?
Yeah, I think I have come around to thinking that it means, can I do anything? Which is what we do document in the API.
Ooh, that's tricky.
It's hard to make other authorizers. I mean, speaking from experience, we would need to do some work on the GKE side to actually answer that question because we don't have a concept of all.
So this was, and I may be misremembering, I thought we explicitly intended this not to be reversible. Like this was a one-way question when we did the original design for RBAC, where we said, this means that all is true, but the opposite, asking what enumeration was supposed to be impossible. I don't think we intended to answer star from the query perspective at the time we discussed it. Doesn't mean that it's not a reasonable request, but I remember having an argument with either Jordan or David where we were like, we want to make resource access review as good as it can be, but not require the underlying implementation to be fully broad, like to be able to enumerate, specifically for a case like this.
Yeah, I think you can get into interesting examples where you have granted every single possible verb on pods, but star would answer no.
Right, and I think that I think we wanted to avoid negative checks in here, but like as an example, asking for a verb no one has thought of, to me, is exactly the equivalent of star, which is if you make up an insane verb that no one human in the history of the world has ever used before, then you have all. We kind of said it just wasn't formalizing star in the client-facing API was not something that we originally were like. I vaguely recall us saying we don't want to do that, but the reason was mostly just to.
Wait, I wasn't around when you guys did this. Like, to me, conceptually, star is always meant. It's like a placeholder so that when you have a cluster admin that's got star and everything, it's sort of like the origin of all other RBAC permissions. Right? It can grant like some operator with some CRD requirements, any, like any group, any resource, any verb, and it kind of bootstraps everything into functional state. But I've never thought of anything beyond that as like a.
It was a close variant of that. It was like, we want to express the idea that no matter what the verb is, if you have a certain permission on the resource, you have that permission. And so it is cluster admin. It's basically that statement, but maybe a little bit less specific to the bootstrapping, but its biggest practical implementation would be bootstrapping. Cluster admin has star, star, star. But the star was meant, doesn't matter what the value of this is, you have that permission.
Yeah, and that is reflected in the subject access review API. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize this. It means something almost equivalent in RBAC policy in that it's a wildcard match. Does RBAC policy actually interpret star in a subject access review differently than other verbs, or does it just hit a wildcard and that matches star or star star? I didn't double check. When I first saw this, I thought that potentially it was RBAC bleeding into the generic authorization API. It seems okay it seems reasonable for authorizers to accept this if they can, and otherwise return deny or no opinion for authorization checks that they can't perform, which I think is probably what we're going to do to resolve this bug.
I definitely would say the alternative for a client, the workaround, is make up a word and pass it, and if it says true, you have all.
Yeah.
I think explicitly asking about star also does that in a lot of the cases, and that might have been what Mike was getting at.
Yeah.
How does RBAC actually do it? Like, I think RBAC, you ask it about star, and it's like, oh yeah, I got a rule where the string is star, so sure.
You mean coincidentally in the implementation asking for star equals star, right? Versus
or wildcard.
Yeah, or it could work either way, where you asked about a string, and since you had the wildcard rule, the string star matches that wildcard. But I think it's a luck of the draw thing with RBAC that star happened to just be any other random string. So
oh please, I'm sure we could claim that we intended it to happen. Prove differently.
So it seems like the API doc is fine because it allows authorizers to serve this permission if they are capable of it. I don't think it's something that we can really or need to change. And then we should also potentially document that some authorizers do not have capabilities of answering a query like this.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
So on the Kubernetes side, this I think is mostly a documentation issue. And
So I assume the reason it came up is the person was running a cluster in GKE that also has RBAC enabled, so or something like that, and RBAC can answer the star, but GKE can't, and so you get sort of confusing results.
yeah,
And I think GKE specifically has this weird bug with how it falls back for custom resources, where it basically said star something I don't know about, so we're going to check your custom resource permissions. And it was like, yeah, you can do stuff with custom resources. That's something we need to fix on our side, but we wanted to get some clarity on how everyone else was thinking about the API contract.
I'll follow up on that one as well. I think that closes stuff out for unprioritized. And we still have some open issues. All right, well, since we're all triaged, I think we're done for the day. Does anybody have anything else to discuss? Cool, well, let's make this a short one. I think Mo's gonna follow up with a poll for deep dive discussion topics at the next KubeCon. And I think that Tim is gonna send out a document that the audit policy people have been working on. Cool, thank you very much, everybody. Have a good 2 weeks.
There it is.